Hi, and welcome to another episode of Kasper On BI. I'm really excited today. Today we're going to really dive into one of the core tenants of Fabric. We're going to talk about OneLake. And OneLake is really the foundation of everything that we do in Fabric. And in order for us to learn more about it, I've invited Josh Caplan, who is the program manager in charge of OneLake on the Fabric team, to talk to us about it. I'm going to ask him lots of questions. So without further ado, let's just go to the episode. Let's go. So, Josh, great to have you here. It's Fabric, what is it, week, whatever. A lot of people have been asking a lot of questions around Fabric, and today we'll dive into one of the core foundations of Fabric, OneLake. So maybe you can do a little bit of introduction before we dive into the OneLake. I like saying diving into the OneLake. Really funny. Not really. But maybe you can start sharing a little bit about who you are, what you do. I know we have worked together in many different places and times throughout the years at the Power BI team. But yeah, maybe you can share a bit.
I was actually on my interview loop for getting on the analysis services team the first time around.
Exactly. Good old days.
Guess you gave me a hire.
Yes.
But yeah. I'm Josh Caplan. I lead product management for OneLake now, which I can officially call OneLake. And I've been around Microsoft for a while. I actually started out as a developer on our MS sales team, and moved on as a PM and developer on Bing as well too. And
and actually, I remember you created some really cool stuff there too.
Yeah, I did so analysis services load balancer a while back. And something else that's actually skipping my mind right now that I think did pretty well. I was a big user of analysis services, and I always kept trying to get the analysis services team to hire me one day. And eventually they broke down and let me on the team. And now, I joined Kasper on Power BI back in about 2014, right? Probably about 6 months before we decided to relaunch Power BI.
Yeah.
And Kasper and I actually shared an office, and we worked on the developer experiences for Power BI. I eventually went on and did Power BI Embedded and Power BI Premium before about 2 years ago switching over to Synapse, and now getting there right before we started working on Fabric. And as Fabric started, I've taken on OneLake. So quick, long journey through Microsoft.
Full circle. We're back.
Full circle, yes.
We're back. Yeah, I mean, I do remember that office really nice. We had such a nice view there.
We had a view of Lake Bill,
Yes.
which they tore the building down, but I think the lake is still there if you look on the side of the lake. It's a little puddle in the middle of the dirt field.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're rebuild it.
And actually, I think I saw it in one of your presentations about when you were doing one.
Yeah, it's our pristine data lake is Lake Bill.
Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, so I mean, so it's quite interesting because you also had, before you started working with the analysis services team, you actually had some hands-on, real-world experience. So that definitely.
Being in MS sales, I did a lot of the BI there, and then I moved on to Bing, and Bing was just a whole nother challenge of just petabytes of data a day coming in from search and from ads, and trying to do BI on top of that. In the days before Spark was available, it was just heavy map reduce. So interesting challenges and a lot of patterns and practices learned back then that are still very applicable today.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably a lot of people still don't have the amount of data today that you were throwing around then.
Well, I remember bugging the analysis services team back then for features like, hey, well, if you can handle this for us, you can handle this for anybody. And the truth was there wasn't that many people, many customers that had that volume of data at that point too. So they were very focused on self-service, and I think they made the right strategic calls back then.
Yeah.
And now, it's nice with Fabric. We're really getting into some of these larger data volumes now.
Yeah, that will be interesting. So, okay, so let's start OneLake. Okay, so maybe you can do a little introduction for us. I mean, we've seen talking about it. We've seen Arun's session, and maybe they've even seen your session at the MS Build too. But like, we have a lot of questions. So maybe you can start introducing it to us, and then we'll dive in from there.
So OneLake, and I think you probably heard the tagline by now, is the OneDrive for data. And I really do love the comparisons, even just all through Fabric, just the comparisons to Office. It's really great to kind of take products that have existed one way for a while and really try to compare them and make them like other products that are not necessarily in the same area.
Yeah.
It's one way you can innovate. OneDrive for data is really applicable here. If you really think back to just file sharing prior to OneDrive and Dropbox coming along, I mean, it's just a whole different story. Most of your collaboration was still probably through email or through just sharing. If you go way back, still sharing through disks or the first kind of service way of sharing or server way of sharing, I should say, is they're just taking servers and creating network file shares, and you use storage to share files. Dropbox comes along and later OneDrive, and now you have a SaaS service now that's particularly targeted towards sharing files and collaborating over files, and things have never been the same since then in terms of file sharing. Data lakes have been a lot like that. You don't buy a data lake, actually, you buy storage. And you implement data lake patterns and strategies on top of storage. And customers have these ideas of these really pristine data lakes where it's just one simple place to land your data. And great thing about one place to land your data is less things should just make things easier. Easier to share, easier to blend together, easier to collaborate, easier to govern. Less copies, less things to govern. The reality, though, is when you build these data lake solutions on top of your storage, not only is that a lot of work to build those solutions, but it's just really hard to have one data lake. It's hard to collaborate, and some of that is technical challenges, but a lot of that is just organizational challenges. So you end up with lots of storage accounts, lots of separate efforts going on, lots of different teams building their own data. Now you have these silos of data that can't talk to each other. Now you're building more solutions to kind of share the data, break down those silos, collaborate over the data, manage the copies of the data. You saw kind of the rise recently of this data mesh pattern, which actually pushes you more in that direction, which is, all right, more lakes so teams can work independently, more solutions on top of that to make it easier to collaborate and share the data and make more copies of the data. But these are all things you have to build. These are all projects you have to maintain over time. OneLake really, again, just back to OneDrive, it's just going to be there. There's always going to be one. There's never going to be more than one. It's by default part of your tenant with your Fabric tenant, and data just starts flowing into it. Because that you don't get these silos that are just created. Like the data mesh pattern, you still want to have collaboration over a single lake, the same data. So instead of going to multiple resources, multiple lakes, like the pattern kind of pushes you to, we fix that in the product. We add features to let you collaborate over a single lake. We add workspaces so different teams can work independently. We've now added domains, officially part of the product. Again, different business domains can have multiple workspaces, all working independently. So really try to tackle those collaboration challenges, just like OneDrive did for file sharing, tackle those collaboration challenges for data. So everyone in an organization is now actually possible for them to use one single lake.
Yeah, and I mean, just to start asking some questions on this, like, I think the major difference between what OneLake has to offer and like building data lakes in Azure is that it's accessible, right, for everyone, and maybe it's a question I had on a little bit later on, but like OneLake by itself is nothing, right? It's files sitting in the SaaS service, but what makes it really powerful is that you can do anything on top, right?
Right. So the OneLake itself, we have to be a little bit different than just storage. When you're building your own data mesh patterns, or your own data lake patterns, I should say, and you're building it on top of storage, you're kind of putting these practices in place so you can put data in and know how to get it out and use it. We have a little bit more opinion on that. Yes, it's still a data lake at heart, so you can put unstructured data in there. You can put random binary files in there. You can put any data in there. But we have opinions, and we also push you to putting it in there in a certain way. So at the very least, it's in there in a way that we know something about it. We know if you put it in a certain place and you put it in a Delta Lake format, it's a table. And we can say, all right, that table now automatically works with our SQL engine, our Power BI analysis services engine. So I can build reports directly on top. I can directly query it with SQL. I can use Spark on top of it. Well, we have very strong opinions about how you put that data in, so we know automatically how to use it and get some data out.
And that's one copy, right?
One copy, yeah. So one copy of data, we try to give you the most value as possible on top of a single copy of data. So completely separate the storage and compute, OneLake being that storage layer. But then you can use multiple computes on top of that same copy of data. So, traditionally, if you follow the data warehouse, the modern data warehouse architecture, it's land your data in storage, copy your data in storage, transforming it, potentially copy it again into kind of your goal, your final form. But now it's in the shape that you want to go ahead and use it. But before you use it, copy it again into a data warehouse, copy it again into data marts and cubes, and keep copying. Now, once the data is in the shape you want to use it, just use it. Use it with SQL. Use it with analysis services without making that extra copy.
Yeah.
And the great thing here, too, is even before you get into that state, you can get more value out of your other copies, your silver layers, things that are traditionally now kind of locked away in a lake and only some users have access to it. You can run queries on top of these things. You can access it directly if you want to give users access now, and you can get more value out of even those copies of data.
So let me get this straight. So we have one copy or one lake, which is like file storage that's sitting bound to your tenant. So you have one file storage for your whole tenant. And then what? Like, how do I work with files sitting in that lake? Like, do I create containers? What?
Well, so let's take it from the Fabric perspective for a minute. So if I just go ahead and create a data warehouse, and I write a SQL query to create a table, and I create an insert statement into that table. Under the covers, I created a bunch of Parquet files and a bunch of directories. Everything kind of maps to a lake concept. But as a SQL developer, I didn't have to know that. I didn't have to see that. This is what the data items in Fabric do. They give you an experience on top of OneLake.
So you have,
if you're a SQL developer,
Fabric, and then you have workspaces.
Yep. So you'll have one tenant for Fabric. That will represent your entire lake. And within that, you have workspaces. Those really look like, if you're looking at it from the lake perspective, they look like containers within the lake. Then you have these data items. From the lake perspective, the data items will look like just folders. So a data item being like a warehouse, looks like a folder in the lake. But from coming in through the UI experience, that data item will be tailored to really the persona that I am. So if I'm a SQL developer, I'll use the data warehouse. I'll feel like I'm working with a SQL database, not a data lake. Behind the scenes, everything still translates into files in OneLake. That can be accessed by Spark. Can be shortcutted into a lakehouse. Can be used in Windows File Explorer just as files. Same copy of data can be used in multiple places, but the data items and the experiences behind the data items actually turn that into, in this case, a SQL-specific experience if it's data warehouse.
So you mentioned you mentioned a few things already pretty quickly that we need to dive in. So imagine the following, right? I am a company and I already have an ADLS storage or an S3 bucket or whatever it is, and I'm just landing in data from the factory into that place today. Can I also use that?
So you have a couple options there. Let's say you're going to try to do the equivalent in OneLake. We talked about the warehouse, and the warehouse lets you land data through SQL, and that's fully transactional. Now, the lakehouse, that data item is probably the most lake-like, I like to say. If you're comparing that to a container, you can just create a lakehouse instead. And there'll be a file path that lakehouse. Let's say you're landing data through Databricks. Instead of, right now, you probably write it to some ABFS path that lands it into a ADLS storage account. You can literally just there'll be an ABFS path to OneLake, to your lakehouse that you just created. Lakehouses are very lightweight. All it does is going to create a folder in a workspace inside OneLake. You take that path, you just pop it into Databricks, and it'll write the files now directly to OneLake.
So you can
if you already have them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Yeah. So now in this case, in this case, you were saying you create the lakehouse, you copy the path, and you allow Databricks to write to it. Okay, that's really cool.
Correct. Yeah, anything that can write to ADLS would then be compatible with OneLake from a read and write perspective. So, especially with the lakehouse, you can both read and write to it from any tool that has access. From something like a warehouse, can only write to it through SQL, but you can read to it, read from any tool that knows how to talk to ADLS.
All right, cool. And then the other option was?
Well, so the other option then too is if you already have it in an ADLS storage account, you don't have to copy it. You don't have to change the path. You can continue managing those ADLS storage accounts, and you can create what we call a shortcut. And a shortcut's nothing more than a symbolic link. It's just a pointer to the data. And in your lakehouse, you'll say new shortcut, and you'll put that little metadata in there that points it to your ADLS storage account. And data in that ADLS storage account will now appear in your lakehouse, and they'll appear in your OneLake as if you had physically copied it in. But you didn't physically copy it in. It's just a reference to it. So when the data changes in the source, it's automatically reflected in OneLake itself. And that will work for ADLS. It'll also work for Amazon S3. So if you have data even across clouds in Amazon, you can virtualize that same data into OneLake, and it'll appear like it's physically in there. And it also works within OneLake itself. So if you have data in different workspaces, data in different data items, you can shortcut them all together and create these virtual data items or data products. If you're,
to be honest,
data mesh pattern.
How long have we been talking about that in the analysis services world? Like with multidimensional, we kind of had it, but the ability that you can just have a dimension table sitting in this. I mean, and now I know we're getting a little bit ahead of the topics that we need to talk about, but imagine you have a domain product over here where you do have all your product related data, and you just want to use that product table in your sales data. Shortcut, boom.
This is really how you get to OneLake, because you'll typically have different business domains own different chunks of the data and maintain those different chunks of the data. And to really get that full view, you'll have someone who will combine data from multiple domains, which right now is a lot of data movement, a lot of copying, and a lot of maintaining those copies over time. Here, now you can just shortcut, take little bits and pieces of different domains and just shortcut them together. And you can have a virtual data product where everything comes together in one place.
But
and yeah, it'll have a SQL database. It'll run SQL on top of it. It'll run Power BI data sets right on top of that too.
But now also to ask a little bit of difficult question. So now you have this S3 data sitting in there, and it's some CSV files or Parquet or whatever it is. And now I want to run some Spark over it. How's the performance going to be? And who's going to pay for it?
Performance is, okay, so a couple questions there. So performance is actually, it's very similar to running a query over just data across regions, essentially. So not the same as if you're in the same data center, but about the same as if you're going kind of cross data center. And under the covers, what we kind of do is we translate the ADLS. So it looks like ADLS to the end user. The end user doesn't have to know what's coming from S3. We'll translate the ADLS calls over to S3 calls, and we'll run them directly against S3 and pipe the data back to you. Now, you asked about cost. So there's an egress cost with that when you pull data out of S3.
Yeah.
And then the same egress cost would kind of come in if you were actually copying the data and building a pipeline around that too.
Yeah.
Right now in the preview, every time you basically run a connection to S3, most of the times it will pull the data. There's some kind of caching that goes on in each of the the SQL layer and some of the other places, but there's not yet caching at the OneLake. You'll see that in a little bit. We're going to release caching, and the caching is mostly there to address the egress charges. What it'll start to do is once we pull it, we'll cache it locally within OneLake, and future calls, if that data is not changing, we'll just go against the cache. You'll get a little bit of a perf boost there. You'll also get...
so you send a little query to S3 to ask if the things have changed or something? How do you know?
Yeah, right now, we're still tuning this a little bit. Right now, we basically check the E tags on each file and see if they've changed since the last time we pulled them. And if they've changed, we'll repull them. If they haven't, we'll serve it right out of the lake. And data lake strategies, typically, you don't change files, you append files. So changing data is not typically a problem, but it can happen. This won't be a cache you have to maintain. This is something we'll maintain, and it'll reduce those egress charges. And the nice thing too is that these are modeled kind of modeled data items. So I can build a lake house, and on top of that lake house, I can have SQL scenario, SQL queries being run on there. I can have a bunch of Power BI reports built on top of there. I can have a bunch of notebooks being built on top of there, and they may not be coordinating with each other. The different people who are building those things, because they're all using the same data item, they can all kind of benefit from the same cache of data. So I don't have to do an egress for each one of these. In terms of a cost perspective, that will really help on the cost side. and but performance should be great either way, and it really cuts down on, you don't have to now do this whole big data migration to start using Fabric.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then, so going back to where we were, you can create workspaces, and then inside of the workspace, you can create your Fabric artifacts, and then you can shortcut or create them in there. And then there's also in Power BI world, and also in the Fabric world, we have this thing, capacities, that allows us to do things like multi-geo in there and things like this. So how does that work?
Yeah, capacities really give you kind of two. It's somewhat of a virtual concept, but they have some real world implications there. First, if it's kind of your container for billing, I should say. So any of the workspaces so you associate workspaces with a capacity. Any of the workspaces that are associated with that capacity, that the cost of the storage will get charged to those capacities. And there's compute that goes along with storage. Say if you're using ADLS, that comes in the form of transaction charges. We don't do the transaction charges with OneLake. We'll actually it'll come out of your capacity that you have available to you already, so there's no additional costs on there. So yeah, any of the stored data will go against that capacity. But the other thing that the capacity determines is where your data lives. So you create capacities in certain regions. In certain regions, you assign workspaces to those regions, and the data that you put in those workspaces will reside in those regions. So you can have a multinational OneLake that kind of spans the world, but it's still one logical lake. So if you have requirements that says data has to remain within certain countries, you create certain workspaces in those countries. The data will live in there, but it'll still look like one logical lake across all your workspaces. So actually, if you look at OneLake, I mentioned it's compatible with the ADLS Gen 2 API. So ADLS Gen 2 APIs basically usually address a storage account and you address a container. Yeah. Your entire OneLake will essentially be a giant storage account for your tenant. And then every single workspace will look like a container.
So that triggers a few follow-up questions.
Yep.
First, you said, is there any limit? Can I just put in gazillion, trillion terabytes of data? Or
go for it. Yeah.
Go for it. Okay. That's good.
Oh yeah. Limit storage built on top of ADLS Gen 2. You can just keep loading data to it. The limits with ADLS Gen 2 typically come in with how much you try to read or write at one time. Throughput, essentially. IOPS. We've done a lot of work with the ADLS Gen 2 team. We've done a lot of work on our side. So we're not under the covers. We're not one physical storage account. We are using multiple, and we're picking the numbers and we're scaling that out. So OneLake itself, the whole OneLake is not limited to the limits of ADLS. What we've done is that we've actually put and implementation can change over time, but the way it is right now is every time you create a workspace, you're basically getting a storage account under the covers. And then we've worked with the ADLS team to, within a single storage account, really scale up those limits if needed. So as you start to increase your throughput, increase your IOPS, we have ways of actually increasing the resources we give you under the covers to get higher and higher limits if you're consistently staying above the out of the box limits of ADLS. So one of the things with the SaaS service is you really shouldn't have to worry about this. So it's on our side to really use those levers to make sure we're giving you like a limitless experience there.
I mean, especially with Direct Lake, it's important.
Direct Lake it needs to be very fast. It'll really kind of scan all your data, read it into memory, and then serve out of memory. But it's how quickly can we get those things into memory has been some of the tricks here.
Yeah. All right. So that's one. And then the second thing, you talked about billing. So Amir kind of already lifted a little bit of the veil of charging on Twitter. So so there are some costs associated with storing data in the lake, right?
Yeah. So we tried to match the ADLS Gen 2 pricing exactly. So ADLS Gen 2 charges you kind of price per gig. And then they charge you transaction charges. So we just kind of met the price per gig cost, which will be the same in OneLake. And then the transaction charges, and ADLS Gen 2 was pretty much in a serverless model, right? So you didn't really have capacity. So you paid per transaction essentially to cover the compute. Since we're more in a capacity-based model here, we don't charge you per transaction for the compute. It just it rolls into your capacity. So if you're however many cores you have, it'll just use some of those cores when you read or write to it.
Okay,
this would be the bulk of the cost, and then any of the other rules around egress still apply that apply to ADLS Gen 2 today.
So so you also said like per capacity. So let's say I create a capacity and I add some workspaces to it. So the data that is getting stored in the OneLake from those capacities will go to the capacity manager, the capacity admin.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's one way you control the costs, right? Is you have multiple capacities, and different business teams can have their own capacity, bring their own storage. The nice thing about separating storage and compute is different teams can bring their own compute to use that. You don't necessarily have to provide the compute for everybody to read the data.
Yeah. I mean, you can just shortcut into it from somewhere else.
Shortcut into it. Yeah. So shortcutting into it also is a neat little trick, because it kind of changes who at least pays for the access part of it. The compute part of it, which the compute charges for storage are going to be minimal compared to the compute for, say, SQL or Spark.
So will we be able to start showing up in the capacity metrics app?
Yeah, it's actually already there in the preview. You'll see the numbers, and I think Spark's fully there for everything. I think SQL right now for data warehouse, you're only seeing the compute, the storage compute cost, which, like I said, really tiny. When the rest of SQL comes in, you'll see the full picture there.
All right, so we have workspace, we have talked about capacities. Let's talk about, of course, the most important thing. I mean, actually, there's two important things. I mean, we kind of talked about it before this. One, all this data in the lake, wouldn't it get too messy for me? And like, how do I control it?
Swamp? Yeah, I've heard some good things of one swamp, data swamp. So, and typically a lot of customers will ask, once we kind of describe how you can have different teams working on the same lake together and how anyone can contribute to one lake, some of the initial feedback is, all right, well, how do we turn off access to certain users so that we avoid having messy data in there? We only put the most pristine data in there, the data that's ready for others to consume.
Yeah.
My response to that is typically don't do that, because if you turn off the access to OneLake, and OneLake should be the easiest place to land your data.
They will go back to OneDrive.
It'll go back to being one place somewhere else, and you don't know if that somewhere else is governed by default. You don't know how that other place is being used. Users always find a way. They got to get their jobs done, so they find a way. That's part of the proliferation of all the storage accounts today, is because, all right, well, I didn't want to comply with all the rules that the owner of this data lake had, so I built my own.
Or IT wants to be in control.
IT wants to be in control, but then you lose control. Stuff goes elsewhere, and maybe it's not your problem today, but becomes their problem tomorrow when you have to figure out why all this insensitive data is somewhere else. Is it being governed? Is it being managed? At least with OneLake, everything is governed by default. Everything is ultimately under the control of a tenant admin.
Okay, so maybe
what do you do with that?
Let's go. Okay, before we start talking about the messy part and how we solve the messy part, let's start talking about the security part. Even though we haven't really talked about it a lot, even at Build, we haven't talked about it a lot. And I saw your session. You talked a little bit about something called OneSecurity. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about the governance part. Like, how do I make sure that I'm not uploading all my patient information into the cloud and things go crazy?
Well, so what? Basically, by default, like we said, data will land in OneLake from the different data items there, and the tenant admin can set policies on OneLake, set the basic rules. Now, different workspaces have their own access control, have their own administrators, and they can set further rules. They can set further access control. Even today, before OneSecurity, you have different workspace-specific permissions. They can control who can see who can access the data. Mm-hmm. And even today, you have control over who can see the access to the data in OneLake versus who can access it through SQL. And in SQL, you're actually able to apply more security on top of the data.
So that's mostly
you have those. Mostly ACLs, yeah. Well, mostly really RBAC. You can do RBAC, workspace level RBAC, control plane RBAC if you're thinking from the Azure perspective. And one thing I like to say is, how do you stop someone from uploading something they shouldn't? Well, it's tough to do that no matter what. But what you can do here is you get this, as an admin, you get this overall view of everything that's going on. You can see what's being used, and there's these things called data certifications or data endorsements.
So how can
you can certify certain data?
How can I see?
So certain data can be certified. So the official data, the data that is official, IT can certify those. And actually, with the new domain feature coming in, you actually even have the domain owner certify the data. And you're going to say some data is recommended. Now, what this should mean is that the important data really separates itself and rises to the top of the lake, and the rest of the stuff kind of sinks to the bottom. If it doesn't happen, you can look at the admin usage reports. You can see the data that's uncertified that's actually still being used, and decide to take some action. Whether it's go get that data certified, go get that data moved into control of IT, or get the data shut down if it's really something that shouldn't be there. But you can start to see these things that get used and decide what to do next. It's not a mystery anymore. You see the whole lake and you see what's going on.
And is there anything like honestly, I don't know the question, but I don't know the answer. But like today in Power BI, we have these things like MIP labels, and also like we have these capabilities to scan data on PII and then send warnings and stuff. Is that something that is?
Yes, you have that for Power BI data sets right now, and that is going to be coming to OneLake. So basically, when you land data in OneLake for lake houses and warehouses, it will also scan it there too,
awesome.
And be able to at the very least give warnings.
Yeah.
Now with One Security coming in, One Security gives us finer grained access control. And that finer grained access control can be at a table level, a column level, a row level, and you combine the two. It's a cell level, basically. And that someone can explicitly control and set security on. But with the scanning will also become more capable over time to be able to say, all right, well, this is PII, and I can warn and say you're out of compliance, or some action and use One Security automatically to block access to certain users to seeing that data. So over time, I mean, even now, it'll be better to have the data in OneLake versus not in OneLake. Even if it's still garbage data you don't want people to see, it's still better to have it there than sitting on someone's local machine or sitting in some random.
Because you can see somewhere whether or not it's actually, like, if it's not being used, you don't care. So
yeah, and you might care. I mean, data that's not being used sitting on someone's machine is not safe, right? At least you don't know how that machine's being secured. You don't know if it's being kept up to date on policies. At least if it's sitting in OneLake, you can make sure the rules are in place, and at least it's protected. Whether someone's using it or not, it's a different problem then after that you also have more control over.
And then, so going back to the One Security, you said, so there will be a way in your workspace to determine who can see what data, like who has access to what.
So right now there's a way to do it by workspace and data items. So a very high level, but still, something there that's important. And that can be combined with some of the engine specific security like SQL has today to get more finer grain. Now with One Security coming, the idea there is that we actually secure the data in place, put the security rules with the data in the lake, lives with the data in the lake, and then we uniformly enforce it across all engines. So if I say you can't see a table, you can't see a table in OneLake. You can't see a table when you use that with SQL. You can't see a table when you use it with Power BI data sets. You can't use the table if you connect Databricks to it and try to read it. Right? Yeah. The security rules get defined once and used everywhere. And this is a pretty big fundamental change. If you look at how these problems have been solved in the past, is you create more lakes. It's usually you're striving towards having one thing, and to work around all the problems of one thing, you end up with more things. You create more lakes, you create more data warehouses, you create more other things where you can secure the data. You bring in catalogs, now you're maintaining those things. A big difference here between what we're doing and what's been done in the past is we're just attacking these problems in one place. So if the right experience is to have one thing, we're going to give you one thing, and we're going to work on the challenges of that have forced you to bring more stuff in the past. So secure it directly in one place, collaborate in one place, use it everywhere.
And when will we, I know it's not there today and we're not talking about it that much. When will we see some of these things? Ballpark?
Soon. I mean, we're in active development on it. I think we're about to release, if they're not out by the time this video is out, we'll have a roadmap released with some more dates in there. But we're actually working on the first phase of One Security. One Security is a huge undertaking. Yeah. Originally, we thought we would just slap some ACLs or slap some rules onto the lake itself, and everything would be great, which is kind of how other solutions have worked. But we need to do it in a way that stays secure and maintains the great performance you get in SQL and analysis services, which all rely on lots and lots of caching and multiple users sharing the same caches. So we've taken a more fundamental approach of attacking that problem and doing this in a way where we can maintain that performance and also secure it in one place in the lake. Yeah. So you'll start to see the first bits rolling out and over the next several months, and then it'll be an ongoing thing with new stuff rolling out as time goes on.
All right, that makes sense. And I have much more questions, but I'll just get you back once we have One Security out.
Sure.
About some of the details too. Okay, so now we've loaded data into the lake. We can do One Security. Today we can do like workspace security, so you have access or not. Even if you don't have access today on the workspace, you won't be able to load it in Databricks, for example. Like if you have that link, you can't use it.
If you had so if you have the data in OneLake, if you have access to it, you can use it wherever. If you don't have access, you can't.
Okay.
And the same thing with so Databricks or anything that accesses it through, let's say, the ADLS DFS APIs, they're really interacting at a file level. So let's say I had row level security that said I couldn't see certain rows. I might see the files there, and I try to download the file, or Databricks tries to download it for me, and they're trying to load data into a table in Databricks. Those files will come back filtered. So only the rows I'm allowed to see.
But that's later.
That's later, yes.
Yes.
Those pieces are, that's all. Everything is later right now on One Security. That one will be not in the very first phase.
No, what I'm saying is today we have workspace security, and if you don't have access to the workspace, you cannot do anything with it. That's the important part.
Correct. And there's two kind of layers within the workspace security. You can use it within the warehouse data set, but you can't access it directly in the files themselves, or you can do both. So if you're an admin, you'll be able to, admin member contributor will be able to directly access the lake or the files.
So, and then on top of that, we'll have governance, and we already have, like you can already see which files are there in the lake and who's using them. That's already there today, is it?
You can see it by data item. So there's some of the admin usage reports that will show you about the different usage of data items.
Awesome. And there are also APIs like we have in Power BI to see everything that's in the lake. And
yeah, so we support the same. Excuse me. We support the same ADLS, DFS, and Blob APIs that ADLS Gen 2 has. So you can see all the files in the lake. You can open it up in Windows and see them. You can open them in Azure Storage Explorer. You can scan the data itself directly in the using the APIs that are there.
But is there also a way to actually see, like, can I just run an API that says give me everything I have in the lake in one lake?
Yeah, well, list it.
Yeah,
usually. Yeah, you can. You'd use the DFS APIs to list all the directories. It'll tell you everything that's there.
That's pretty cool. And then
if you have a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, some people, from my experience in Power BI, I know people want to see everything. So, and it's good that we have some of these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and you have the scanner API with Power BI today. You can figure out the data items from there, and then from each data item, it's pretty intuitive to figure out the path to OneLake for those data items, and you can list the finer grain detail, and you can go as low as you want down to individual files if you really want to.
All right, that's really cool. So what about okay? So now we talked about like that's more the security part. You kind of talked about domains before. So and we have that, and we have like Data Hub. So how are we going to make it easy for people to figure out which content they can use and where can they use it from?
How do you figure out which data item to use, or?
Yeah, like I want to build a report on my products or on my sales or whatever. What do I do?
So the new, so the Data Hub has been rebranded the OneLake Data Hub. And now it includes all the different Fabric data items and not just data sets like it did before. So when you want to discover data, that's the place to go to. Search for what you're looking for, and you'll discover things that either you have access to or things that you have access to at least know are there and you can request access to. So not everything that comes up you'll immediately have access to, but you'll be able to at least request access to it. And once you're granted access, when one security is in place, you won't have to ask yourself, can I use this with Spark? Can I use this with just a data set or Excel or whatever? You'll be able to use it with anything. In a lot of cases that you'll be able to use it with anything, but if the workspace admin is kind of restricted down to only be able to use it with a, say, data set or SQL, those would be the things you can do with it. With the Data Hub, we'll tell you those things. It's just a great place to go find your data. It's available in the Fabric service itself. It's also in Power BI Desktop and in Excel.
And that's also where that domain specific. I mean, you kind of already talked about it a bit, but
yeah, domains is another great way to just organize your data, and the Data Hub exposes that, so you can see different domains. You can basically search for data by domain. So I want to see all the data for sales. Switch to the sales domain. I can search within the sales domain and get a more specific sales experience. So those things are available now in the preview.
All right, that makes sense. And then I also saw, like in the demos, like the OneDrive thing in the bottom.
Yep.
What does that do?
So
How does it work?
So that was our way of making OneLake really the OneDrive for data and actually being able to see it and feel it. So there's no great place yet in the UI where you can see your entire lake across everything. It's kind of the combination of the workspaces and the data items. You can kind of explore everything, but the OneDrive or the OneLake client for Windows actually brings, just like OneDrive brings your entire OneLake into Windows, and you can explore all OneLake using Windows File Explorer. And it works as actually the same way as OneDrive. Those Cloud Sync APIs that OneDrive, originally just part of OneDrive, now are actually part of Windows. We leverage those same APIs, and what we do is we look at your entire OneLake and we sync essentially placeholders of your OneLake to your file system, so you can go and look through and see every file you have in OneLake available right there in Windows. And it doesn't actually download the files until you actually go and try to use them. But it's a two-way sync, so everything you put into OneLake will show up now in Windows. You can read it in Windows. Anything that works with a file in Windows can work with the files that are in OneLake. And when you write files to the File Explorer, it'll do the sync right back up. It's just kind of a really easy way of working with OneLake without you having to know anything Data Lake specific, anything OneLake specific. If you know how to work with files in Windows, you know how to work with OneLake now.
I'm just thinking about all the interesting things that I could do with that.
There are so many interesting things. I can't wait to see what people actually do, because it's it really does open you up to that entire Windows ecosystem. And there are a lot of interesting kind of data science things that can be done with it. If you're a data scientist on Windows, for sure. It's interesting developer scenarios that would be possible with it. But I have a feeling there's a whole bunch of things we're not even thinking about that people are going to discover and start doing with it. And I can't wait to see what those are. I already saw a bunch over the weekend that were really cool. Being able to actually explore the files locally in tables, being able to read and write Python directly to the files in Windows. All those things were really cool. And we didn't have to do anything specific to support them other than sync these files to Windows, and these apps already know how to work with files in Windows.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then one of the other questions that already came up today, egress cost for that.
So we don't actually download anything until you actually go use it. When you actually go and use it, the downloads will be, it's technically then the egress cost that Azure Networking would charge you. Right now, there's nothing for the trial, but those egress charges are really designed around terabytes. So you shouldn't really notice much for stuff you're bringing to your local machine. And then there's a certain amount of included quantity that Azure Networking builds in there too. So I wouldn't expect that to be a big factor there, but it would follow the same rules as Azure networking.
Because at OneDrive, you don't get any egress cost.
In OneDrive, you don't. No, that's kind of worked into the price of the cost there. So in order not to change the pricing of ADLS Gen 2, we've kind of matched the ADLS Gen 2 pricing exactly, which when you get to larger scale is definitely a plus versus kind of trying to pack a premium into that cost.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. So let's say I'm a massive multinational organization, and I already have a ton of data sitting in ADLS and different places. How would I go about? Like, would I start creating those domains and start hooking in my already existing storage accounts that I have and start exposing it to Fabric? And what would be the benefit for me to do so?
Well, one of the benefits is, if you already have lots of disparate lakes, you can virtualize them together in one lake pretty easily without having to move any of the data. And you can actually start to see the benefits of one lake, have one place to discover the data, have one place to use the data, automatically get it working with Power BI data sets and SQL and everything one copy buys you. That's pretty straightforward. Just virtualize it in, create those shortcuts. Now, what I've heard from a lot of customers over time is they want to get out of managing all these extra resources. So just virtualizing it in, you still have those resources. You're still managing those extra resources. So over time, some customers want to actually then move stuff into OneLake or start all new projects directly in OneLake, so they're not then having that extra overhead of managing additional resources. Both are totally acceptable. And I expect customers to probably use a combination for a long period of time. But if you're starting from scratch and you don't have a lake, you're building a new lake, and there's nothing easier than just saying, all right, we can create a lake house and just land the data in there. You can do it in seconds, literally. And then everything just kind of works. You don't have to worry about managing additional resources after that. You'll even need an Azure subscription to do that.
But I think I think the main thing you said there, and I think this is probably the thing that people need to start thinking about, because like you have the data sitting there in some lake, and today only some handful of data scientists that you've curated can get access to it and can use it because they know where to go in Azure or whatever it is, tools that they have to connect to it. But here now, I mean, you give them access in OneLake, like on the workspaces, and all of a sudden they can run Python, they can run Spark, they can run SQL, they can, I mean, on. But
you really start to get the value out of your data, right? Like, data lakes were really meant to unlock data and get it into the hands of business users, but so often, for many, many reasons, they're just locked away and only select few actually have access to it. This really starts to make that data accessible, and you really start to get the value out of that data, because building lakes and maintaining lakes not cheap, not easy.
But
and
there's a difference, right? So today, if I create a lake house in Fabric, you have two different sections. You have files and you have tables. With files, it can be anything from movie files to pictures to CSV files.
Yep.
But to make it into a table so that it can be read with SQL and with Direct Lake, it needs to be in Parquet format.
That's one of the principles or one of the opinions, I should say, we have, is you put it in specifically Delta Lake format, Delta Parquet format. And
we're not allowed to say Delta Parquet anymore by Simon Whiteley.
Yeah, I'm just trying to teach myself to say because everyone else was saying it now. But yeah, Delta Lake, let's say, to make Simon happy, which is always in Parquet. I mean, theoretically, it doesn't have to be Parquet, but yes, in practice, it's always been Parquet. So you put it in that format, and we've trained our SQL engine, our analysis services engine, Spark engine, just to automatically recognize those and treat them as tables, and they will just work as tables with no extra steps. It is actually a little magical. The first time we did a demo of one copy, I was putting it together. This is still several months ago. No one had tried it yet, and typically when you do a demo for the first time or try to do a demo for the first time, it's like, getting all the different engineering teams together, figuring out what doesn't work and changing everything. And we've been working on this for months in just different parts of the team and just kind of building towards the requirement of one copy. And I think I was actually testing with Databricks at the time too. I'm like, I'm going to land some Delta Lake data into OneLake, into the table section. And first time I tried it, it just worked. Ended it there. I ran a SQL query against it. I ran a Spark notebook against it. I ran a Power BI data set against it. And it was literally like you can still hear my voice in the first requirement. Like, this is magical. It was a great experience. And yeah, really having these opinions, having everyone build towards it really just unlocks so much value for you automatically. And as more stuff comes online in Fabric, that value will continue to grow. But adopt some of these patterns and you just get these things out of the box. It's really great.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's, yeah, I must say, I was just playing today, like, even for me, it already, like, I'm a traditional BI guy, as you know. I don't know much about Spark and notebooks and stuff like that. I know, like, the traditional data warehousing, ETL, and even today, Phil Seamark was showing me something in the morning about some notebooks that he created to do some ETL. I was like, yeah, shit, you can do that stuff? Oh, I probably should not say words awesome, like that, but like...
As a SQL developer, I'm like, I always wish we had notebooks for SQL. I know they started to come in more recently, but yeah, stuff you can do. So I built a bunch of talent. When I took this job, way back when I started on Power BI, you don't have as much access to real data as you used to when you were actually a practitioner and you're working with stuff. So I always look for opportunities. This time, I built all our telemetry pipelines in Fabric. And I'm a traditional SQL guy mostly. So I really, really wanted a lake house. So I ended up just in the same workspace building both a warehouse and a lake house. And I staged my data in the lake house. I wrote a bunch of stored procs in SQL to load it and transform it using transactions in case, and I orchestrate everything with pipeline in case there's anything that needs to be rolled back. Transactions help me there. And then I shortcutted it back into the lakehouse so I have it everywhere. And so I get the best of both worlds. And to me, it feels like one thing. Like I have it in two different data items. That's really just to really control the different transactions. And I can still pull together as one thing. And I get the best of both worlds in that case. I can do as much as I want in notebooks. I can do as much as I want in SQL. And as I learn notebooks, I'll probably start doing more notebooks.
Yeah.
And I get to pull together as one data item, and then I build a Power BI report on top of it.
I mean, the way that some of the stuff that he showed me was like, it's so easy to parameterize and just, yeah, do a lot of ETL and with like just a few commands.
Go to Bing or ChatGPT and just ask, and it'll give you a bunch of code samples.
Actually, I haven't done that yet, but now I will.
That's how I got through our demos.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so cool.
How to do that.
So, okay, we talked about a lot. We're nearing 1 hour, which is usually the time when I do the cutoff. I think we also talked, I'm just looking at my list. I think we covered most of it. What did we not cover? What is the most underrated feature that no one knows about for OneLake?
Most underrated feature. So we did talk about domains a bit. Domains, when we talk about it, everyone loves them. Watch the session if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description.
I kind of got lost a little bit in the noise of everything coming out because we released so many things, but you'll certainly hear more about it if you haven't seen the session directly. That one for sure. OneLake itself, I mean, think about your data strategy. Think about how this fits in. Think about it as really the OneDrive for data, and I think you'll really see just how transformative this is. I mean, a lot of the feedback we got early on was, exactly how is it possible to use OneLake for the entire organization? I think we were getting that feedback so adamantly is because everyone had tried. Everyone wanted OneLake for their organization and tried really hard to do it and found a lot of those challenges. So we worked really hard to remove those challenges, which I think is just a major difference of how data will be used going forward. And if you still start to encounter challenges, I mean, really we need your help in deciding where to go next. So ak.ms/fabric ideas, tell us what would make it even better, what would help you collaborate. And those would be the next things we would look at. But I think most underrated thing is really the amount of value this is going to bring, the way this changes your data strategy. And I could spend another hour just talking, which I'd love to do at some point. And this really changes the game of how you've worked with data in the past. It really makes that data accessible and usable across the organization. And it also really just simplifies the overall management and governance of everything. Everything people hoped for with data lakes and the reason they've been investing so much in data lakes, this brings more as a product than a pattern.
That
we'll
makes sense.
continue
And
to
I
do
think,
things like that.
I mean, it seems for me, and maybe that's also the next question, but I'm already going to answer it. Like, what is the most exciting feature of Fabric? But to me, it opens up all these different things that I didn't know that I could do with the data. So, I mean, I've been just playing around. I mean, again, I'm a simple guy. I'm just loaded in AdventureWorks, a bit bigger than usual AdventureWorks, but now I can do all kinds of things like notebooks over it, and Spark and Python and SQL immediately. Like, it's really simple and straightforward to get all these different copies of different,
the barrier
not
of entry,
copies, but
not copies. I mean, that's why it's easier. Like, and one lake, one copy should make things easier, and it hasn't in the past. Yeah, we're really taking steps to do that now. But the fact that you just have the data in one place, and yes, I can go write a notebook on it. I load it through SQL, but I can go write a notebook on it. It's amazing. I mean, it simplifies the barrier to entry. It simplifies. You don't have to go to this whole big buy decision now to add a new type of a compute. It's all part of the same billing model. You can just go ahead and use it. And you can discover more and use more. And you also now, when deciding your data strategy, you don't have. Typically, we'll have different parts of your organization that are data engineers, and they're Python notebook first, and you have another part of your organization that's SQL first, and have been building warehouses for the last couple of decades. You don't have to pick one data strategy and get them both to use it. One can work with SQL, one can work with Spark, and everyone builds the same data lake. Whichever angle you approach it from, even if you approach it from something outside of Fabric, it all builds up to OneLake. I think Ali from Databricks tweeted out, Databricks will work great on OneLake. So even if you have people building pipelines there, building notebooks there, all contributes to OneLake, landed in there, use all Fabric with it.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, cool. Well, Josh, thank you. We're definitely going to get you back once we have a few more months of baking and you shipping new features, and then we'll come and ask more questions. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will have more questions by then. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time, spending some time with us and teaching us OneLake. So thank you.
Anytime. Appreciate you having me here.
All right, thanks. And that concludes another episode of Kasper On BI. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I learned a lot more about OneLake and Fabric. If you like this episode, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, because more is coming. Next time, we'll be talking about the warehouse, the lake house, data marts with Charles Webb, also from the Fabric team. And again, we'll learn more about that. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.